Today's lecture will be our Chapter 20, Section 1, Objectives. Number 1, analyze the current status of Africa's economy. Number 2, identify ways to develop the economies of African nations. Number 3, explain the role education plays in developing Africa's economies. So the first thing that we look at here is kind of why there are problems in Africa, why there are countries that are extremely poor. What we see is that most countries do little manufacturing. What they're going to do is that instead of manufacturing, they extract the raw materials from the ground, and then what they do is that they sell them to industrialized countries. European countries for a long period of time are going to exploit Africa's resources and the people. So what they do is that these countries are going to go ahead and they're going to take diamonds, and the diamond market might be very, very, very high and they should be getting a lot of money, but instead of producing them, what they're going to do is that they're going to take them in their rawest form, they'll buy them very cheap, and then they'll go ahead and they'll basically turn it into a profit. They're not going to give them top dollar, obviously, because the European countries want to make as much money as they can. Now, another way that they kind of exploit the African people is that for a long period of time there was slavery, and so what they did is that they came in, they traded with the African countries. Those countries are going to go ahead and sell the people to the Europeans, and then what that happens is that the Europeans go and they're going to trade them the rest of the world. So a lot of people sold in slavery, people die, horrible working conditions, and what we see is that the African people and really the economy is going to really suffer from this. Land is mined, drilled, environment is ignored, and so in a lot of these areas there's extreme pollution and major problems with that. All of this has caused economic growth, instability, problems with the economy is not able to grow, but also political stability is also an issue. We talked about in other chapters and sections about how the countries are actually going to go and they're going to give these leaders power, and then with this power they're going to try to make as much money as they can, and instead of building up their infrastructures, they're basically going to do whatever they can to stay in power. And what happens is that the people are unhappy, they try to overthrow the leader, and then that's where that political instability happens. So limited growth, limited political stability make it so that in this area you're going to have major problems. Now, Africa's economic status. Most of the African countries are worse off today than they were in 1960. Average incomes have decreased, where in the rest of the world, of course, they've increased. Worldwide accounts for 1% of the total GNP, 1.5% of exports, meaning that you have this huge continent that is really making minuscule amounts of money for the world. So obviously not making much money causes problems for Africa. They do lack crucial infrastructures, roads, airports, railroads, ports. All of these things, again, have not been built up. Little access to computer, high technology makes it so that African countries are going to be a little bit difficult. Now, one thing that we look at is independent countries. What we look at, and this is what if we've done this in class, we'll go through and we'll talk about debt, and we'll talk about credit, we'll talk about if you've got a budget, and so on and so forth. Now, the reason why we do that is that we look at what we're trying to connect here is we're trying to show you that if you've got a very strict budget, it's very, very difficult on you, and just like African countries, it's very difficult. But if you're borrowing money and having to pay that money back, it's nearly impossible. And so what we see is the total debt of the sub-Saharan governments is almost $227 billion by 1997. And so what happens is that these countries only have a little bit of money, and instead of building infrastructures, roads, things like that, instead of helping out the poor, instead of helping out the people affected by AIDS, they're taking that money and they're paying back the people that helped them become their own country. South Sudan is doing this as we speak. It's causing a lot of issues for them because they're very, very poor. Now, a lot of Western leaders are saying that we should forgive Africa's debt and basically say, hey, you don't have to pay us any more money, just go and basically help build your country up. So This is the idea of reducing that debt, and again, increasing cooperation, trying to improve economies through regional cooperation. You got the Economic Community of West African States, Southern African Development Community. These groups promote trade, improvement in infrastructures, all things that are necessary to continue on and make money. Now, building industries, one of the issues that you see in a lot of these countries is what we call a one commodity country. And this is when you rely on exports of one or two commodities. So, for example, a country like South Africa, they could be doing really good in producing and selling gold. Well, what happens is that what happens if the price of gold on the world market decreases? It basically is going to hurt their economy so much. So what you want to do is that you want to make it so that you sell more commodities. What is a commodity? It's an agriculture or mining product that can be sold. Value varies daily based on world supply and demand, and this makes one commodity a country is very, very unstable, because what they're doing is that if the, again, price of diamonds increases, yeah, you make a lot of money, but if it decreases, that's where you can get a lot of problems. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to get African countries to diversify. What this means is that you want a variety in your economies. You're going to promote manufacturing to achieve economic growth and stability. So, for example, we actually do this in the United States, and specifically in Nebraska when we farm. What we do is, and if you go driving through the farmlands of Nebraska, what you'll see is that a lot of people are going to grow corn, a lot of people are going to grow beans, they'll grow alfalfa, all different types of things. And so what happens is that if the price of corn skyrockets, you make lots of money. But if the price of corn drops, you've got those beans to basically kind of make up and make it so that you didn't lose that much money. That's diversifying right there, and that makes it so that your country's a little bit more stable. Now, improving education, we've talked about how important education is. Uneducated populace is a large barrier for economic development. Average schooling time for women is only up about 1.2 years in the last 40 years. Angola and Somalia, civil wars have destroyed school systems, and it makes it so that the children aren't able to get an education. However, Algeria, 94% get a formal education. 83 of the Martins are going to be over 50% are literate, which is going to really help out a lot and make those a little bit more developed areas. Now, reverse brain drain. What we see is that a lot of countries in Africa, when people become educated, they start getting people to go to Western countries. Those Western countries have got more money, they're more developed, and so what happens is that those Central countries, South countries, Eastern countries, they sit there and they say, hey, we don't want to put too much on education because these people are just going to get up and leave. That's kind of this brain drain right here. So they're trying to reverse a brain drain. And what they're trying to do, International Organization for Migration, urges people to return. And you might say, how do you get people to not go to those Western countries and stay where they're from in Central and South Africa? One example in Nebraska that we have is that sometimes you can have a situation where people will go and, for example, in Nebraska, you've got a huge need for doctors in places like Western Nebraska. And so what happens is that you might spend $250,000 to get your medical license, and then what happens is that spending all that money on education, there's some places that say, we will pay your college tuition, we will pay you back all of your student loans if you come here and work. And they're doing the same thing in that International Organization for Migration, is that they're urging people to stay in that area by helping them out with tuition, things of that nature. This concludes Chapter 20, Section 1. Please complete the assessment at this time.